Welcome to Murder Mile, a true crime podcast, an audio-guided walk featuring many of London's untold, unsolved and long-forgotten murders, all set within and beyond the West End. Today's episode is about the murder of William Raven, an elegant, sociable divorcee and co-owner of a gentleman's outfitters, who was found battered to death in his own bed. Everybody liked him, but was this a bungled robbery, a revenge attack, or was it something a little more ordinary? Murder Mile is researched using the original police files. It contains moments of satire, shock, and grisly details. And as a dramatization of the real events, it may also feature loud and realistic sounds, so that, no matter where you listen to this podcast, you'll feel like you're actually there. My name is Michael, I am your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 104, The Elementary Murder of William Raven. Today, I'm standing on Baker Street in Marylebone, NW1. 3 streets west of the photographic studio where John Reginald Christie took naked snaps of one of his victims. 1 road south of the Regent's Park Barracks, where the Black-Eyed Ripper was arrested. A 10-minute walk from the Regent's Business School, where Martine Vig Magnuson first met the cowardly billionaire's son who became her killer. And a short dawdle from the odd but unsolved murder of Gladys Hanrahan. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Up by the tube station, at the junction of Marylebone Road, the north side of Baker Street is a real disappointment to millions of excitable tourists, who flock to stand next to a semi-sort of look-alike waxwork of a pseudo-celebrity nobody at Madame Tussauds, only to realise there's nothing else here. Nothing but smog, smoke, bogs, and bedsits, choked by the belching buses on a death trap of a road. Baker Street is famous for a few things. There's Jerry Rafferty's sax solo, which every busker is forced to play every hour of every day, or risk losing their license to rip off real artists' records. The home of celebrated sci-fi author H.G. Wells, which is only memorialised by a very small plaque. An obscure tribute to the Beatles, who fled their beloved Liverpool faster than they forgot how to say "addy-doo-do-don't-dee-do." And of course, there's the infamous residence of fictional detective Sherlock Holmes. Still being as smoggy and murder-strewn as it once was, at 221B Baker Street sits the Sherlock Holmes Museum, a shrine to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's literary creation, where avid fans fork out actual cash to ooh at the deerstalker this imaginary character never wore, at the pretend pipe that this made-up detective never smoked, and wow at an out-of-work actor sitting behind a blatantly fake desk that Sherlock never sat at, only to get to the gift shop and realise that the TV series were once books. But as these museum patrons queue up, they have no idea that directly opposite, on the 6th floor of 236 Baker Street, was once a real murder. A baffling mystery, so odd it initially had the detectives perplexed. But through dogged persistence and a clinical investigation, the police would have it solved. As it was here, on Thursday the 15th of October 1942, in flat 34 of Chalfont Court, that William Raven's death looked like a case for the great detective himself, and yet its solution was elementary.
Murder, my dear Watson. Refined, cold-blooded murder.
Murder?
There's no doubt about it in my mind. Or perhaps I should say in my imagination. For that's where crimes are conceived and where they're solved. In the imagination.
Real murders are rarely as thrilling as they appear in detective stories. The victims and killers are almost always connected, whether as family, friends, lovers or rivals. Their motives are usually clear, whether wealth, love, revenge or pride. And although a tale full of plot twists makes for a gripping story, real murders are rarely premeditated, carefully planned, or cleverly executed. Killing is an act of extreme emotion, so being desperate to flee, murderers rarely leave clues or red herrings. The murder of William Raven has all of the tropes of a locked room mystery. A respected businessman is found beaten to death in his own bed on the 6th floor of a secure mansion block. The door was locked from the inside, the key was in place, and there were no signs of a break-in. Nobody heard a sound or saw anything strange, and although they hadn't touched anything of any value, these burglars had stolen £2 from the victim's wallet, a pair of shoes, a fawn suit, and oddly, 2 pairs of white underpants. And yet, even more bafflingly, having been seen by several witnesses that night, in the flat, the killers would leave their fingerprints, a pair of boots, a dirty uniform, and 2 sets of soiled underpants, giving the police a big clue to their description, occupation, and eventually their names. But was this an unplanned murder, a message, or a masterclass in deception and misdirection by a cunning criminal?
Well, Mr. Holmes.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So, who was the victim? Born on the 26th of November 1900, 41-year-old William Raven, known to his associates as Bill, was an elegantly dressed bachelor and well-regarded director of Horstman and Raven, a gentleman's outfitters for the city's well-heeled and high-status clientele, based at 80 Regent Street near Piccadilly Circus. Raised in Leeds, although his modest northern roots were hidden by a cut-glass English accent, being keen to be seen as prosperous and cultured, even as a boy he was immaculate and polite, with dreams of being finely dressed in a tailored suit, handmade shoes, and a silk scarf in his top pocket. As an apprentice, seen as a skilled tailor, William worked hard to learn his craft, and through long hours, patience, an innate sense of style, and a meticulous eye for detail, he established a solid reputation amongst the society elite. Financially, he had some money, but every penny was invested in the shop. His shop's manager was an old and trusted friend. His business partner was like the brother he never had. They had no rivals, no debts, no threats, and although being wartime, they had the savings to weather the storm, very little cash was kept on the premises, and his killers had never visited the shop. In terms of family, he had very little left except for a married sister in Leeds. Sadly, his parents had long since deceased. He had amicably divorced from his wife, and as she had recently passed away, their 2 boys, John and Alan, were being raised by their mother's parents in Cockermouth. As families go, they weren't close, but there were also no disputes, no secrets, and nothing which raised suspicion. During the war, being too old, too small, but more importantly, a pacifist, William did his duty as manager of the Merchant Navy Supply Association, issuing and repairing uniforms for military units, including a few bespoke orders for the Special Operations Executive, who just 2 years earlier had recruited the super spy Christine Grenville and who were based only a few doors down from his Baker Street flat. And yet, although an interesting detail, William was not a spy, a soldier, or a secret agent. Socially, William was a real character, and being just 5'5", with a slim frame, pale skin, elfin-like features, black swept-back hair, and a pug-like nose, he was well known and easy to spot. He was charming, chatty, and generous. He preferred wine, but drank rum or ale to suit his guests. He didn't gamble, fight, argue, or do drugs. He was never nasty or rude, and he treated everyone with equal respect. Sexually, since his divorce, although it was still illegal, William had come out as a gay man. Feeling free, he kept a diary of his sexual conquests, but wasn't looking for a lover, as he preferred the thrill of anonymous sex with a stranger. Usually there were rough-looking squaddies from tough backgrounds, many of which he picked up in gay-safe pubs, like the York Minster on Dean Street, the Swiss Tavern on Old Compton Street, and the Volunteer opposite his flat on Baker Street, where he always ate his nightly supper. And that's pretty much it. William Raven was a businessman who wasn't rich, a widower who wasn't disliked, and a gay man who wasn't being blackmailed or bullied. He had no jealous lovers, no business rivals, no criminal connections, no secret past, and no family feuds. His death made no sense. Of course, this could have been an attack on a known homosexual, but we know that wasn't the case.
What?
My conjecture is that he'll be murdered.
Murdered?
It'll be very interesting to see if my deductions are accurate.
So, if this was a robbery, believing this to be a two-man job, as 3 sets of fingerprints, including William's, were found, how did they get in? How did they get out? Why did they steal just enough cash to last one person for 2 days, but left behind his silver cigarette case, silver lighter, and silver wristwatch? Why did they steal nothing of value from his flat? Just a fawn-coloured suit, a set of shoes, and 2 pairs of white underpants. And yet they left behind a military uniform. Was this uniform his? Were his killers military? Or was this somehow connected to his business? Strangely, even though he had only lived at 236 Baker Street for 13 weeks, this wasn't the first and only unusual robbery which had occurred at flat 34. On Sunday the 11th of October 1942, although there were no signs of a break-in, burglars had stolen every single item of his clothes. But once again, in a strange similarity, they touched nothing else. No art, no jewellery, no electricals, and no paperwork. Was this copycat robbery just a coincidence? An insurance scam? A wartime crime of high-quality suits in short supply to be sold on the black market? Or was this heist merely a ruse to gain entry to the 6th-floor flat in a secure mansion block as part of a premeditated, carefully planned, and cleverly executed murder? Rightly, he reported this burglary to the police, but there was very little they could do. And 4 days later, William Raven would be brutally beaten to death in his own bed.
There are still some gaps to be filled in, but all in all, things are becoming a little clearer.
Not to me, I assure you. Still a hopeless jumble. Put it all together, and what have you got?
Murder, my dear Watson.
Thursday the 15th of October 1942 was William's last day alive. Only he wouldn't know that. As compared to any other day, it was neither odd, unpleasant, nor remarkable. After a good breakfast of egg, toast and tea, Most of his morning was spent in his flat, where a young handsome locksmith replaced his door lock, as a precaution having just been burgled. With his shop under the care of its manager, Wallace Staggle, William had a spot of lunch with an old pal in Soho. He did a stock check at the Merchant Navy Supply Association and visited several outfitters in the West End, as he liked to keep abreast of the current trend in men's fashions. At 3 p.m, dressed in a blue pinstriped suit, a white shirt, a dark tie and a black pair of shoes, William popped into his Regent Street shop and regaled Wallace with his tale of this unusual burglary. As was common practice, Wallace gave his boss £20 in £1 notes out of the till, which he signed for, and to temporarily replace his missing clothes. Into a bag, William packed a stylish but inexpensive fawn suit, 2 white shirts, 2 pairs of white socks, and 2 pairs of white underpants, identical to the ones which would be stolen. And then he left. His mood was upbeat and relaxed. That evening, being in his usual good spirits, William and an unidentified gentleman known only as George met for drinks at the York Minster, a gay-safe pub at 49 Dean Street in Soho. As the camaraderie flowed, drinks were sunk, and the hot bodies mingled in a tightly packed bar, William's roving eye was instantly attracted to 2 boys who were just his type. Being half his age, with a come-hither finger, he beckoned forth 2 short, slim, but well-built boys in their early 20s. And as the mirror opposites to his elegant refinement and high-class sophistication, these 2 Canadian soldiers were both scruffy, uncouth, and rough-looking. But that was exactly the type that William liked. Greeting these 2 cuties by cooing, "Call me Bill," and engaging them in a bit of saucy banter, William made every stranger feel like a friend. And having treated both boys to a few cheeky beers, a little light supper, and having shockingly discovered that they hadn't booked a hotel for the night, having sunk a few more beers at the notorious homosexual hangout known as the Swiss Tavern on Old Compton Street, William and his 2 new pals left the pub at 10:30 p.m, caught the Bakerloo line to Baker Street, and as had become a routine for a gay bachelor with a capacious sexual appetite, William and the 2 young soldiers entered flat 34 of Chalfont Court. They were happy, laughing, and a little bit tipsy. That night, they sat, chatted, drank, and with not one witness hearing a single sound, they all went to bed. The next day, William was found dead, and once again, a very odd robbery had occurred.
That's why so many murders remain unsolved, Watson. People will stick to facts, even though they prove nothing. Now, if we go beyond facts, use our imagination as the criminal does, we usually find ourselves justified.
Detective novels thrive on many devices to make a humdrum killing seem more thrilling, by adding plot twists, misdirection, red herrings, and duplicitous characters, with the big clues being nothing and the smallest of details being everything. Sherlock Holmes knew that the solution to any case was down to the arrogance of the criminal mastermind, who would make a tiny but elementary mistake. Real murders are usually self-explanatory, but strangely, the murder of William Raven was not. Almost all victims and killers have long-established connections, but in this case, they weren't. Their motives are usually clear, whether wealth, love, revenge, or pride. Only this time it wasn't. And although real murders are rarely premeditated, this murder looked entirely spontaneous. But was it? At 9:40 a.m, William's cleaner, unlocked the outer door to flat 34, but found that the inner door was locked from within. She left, alerted no one, and was the only other person with a spare key. At 11 a.m, Marjorie Voigt in flat 35, the flat immediately next door, who had heard nothing the night before, saw the morning's newspaper still sticking out of William's letterbox, but didn't notify anyone until 3 hours later. At 2 p.m, having informed the head porter, Frederick Bowen climbed up the fire escape, entered the flat via the bathroom window, and in the bedroom he found the body of William Raven. The room was messy, chaotic, and bloody, but all of the violence had been contained in just one room. Having called the police, at 2:35 p.m, PC Alan Ireland entered via the fire escape to preserve the crime scene for evidence. Clearly, the tastefully decorated bedroom was once small, neat, and pristine white. But with the plush carpet scattered with a mishmash of khaki clothes, and the once fragrant air buzzing with feverish flies, who fed off a thick soupy puddle of blood which pooled around the head of the double bed, and slurped at the gloopy spatter which was too dry to drip down the patterned wall. Seeing the slightly built, semi-naked man slumped face down on the floor, with his sweet features beaten into a mushy swollen pulp, PC Ireland stood guard over the dead body until the detective arrived. At 3:40 p.m, the police divisional surgeon arrived to confirm that life was extinct. But seeing a subtle rising and falling of the sticky pyjama-clad chest, and a gentle pop as blood bubbles formed about his lips, the PC had missed an important clue. William Raven wasn't dead, but barely alive. A full 12 to 14 hours after his brutal attack, William was rushed to the nearby St Mary's Hospital, but he died at 6 p.m. He never regained consciousness. He never identified his attackers. He never gave a statement, and he never said a single word. The last and only independent witness to his murder had been silenced.
Well, Holmes, what do you make of it? Do you think there's anything in it?
The only way to solve the case was through the evidence presented before them. And yet, this brutal Baker Street murder didn't have the luxury of being investigated by an infamous detective. But they did have the next best thing. Detective Inspector John Smale. He was smart, methodical, savvy, and best of all, he was real. The crime scene presented the detective with the following pieces of evidence, which suggested that this wasn't a pre-planned murder, but a spontaneous emotive attack and an opportunist robbery. With no sign of a break-in, the front door was the only point of entry, and both men were welcomed in by William, who as a habit locked the inner door to the flat and popped the key on a hook in a cupboard. In the sitting room, 3 sets of fingerprints were found on 3 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, rum and cordial. 1 man sat in an armchair, 2 men shared the settee, and at some point, someone briefly slept in the small guest bed in the sitting room. With all but 1 bottle of white wine consumed, the 3 men retired to the bedroom. Here they undressed. William hung up his blue pinstripe suit, and the 2 Canadian soldiers casually dumped their scruffy army-issue uniforms on the floor. At some point during the night, all 3 men removed their underpants, which were found on the floor. According to his diary, William was a known homosexual who frequented gay-friendly bars and had a capacious sexual appetite. If sex did take place, he didn't note it in his diary. And yet, his post-mortem would confirm that the last 3 inches of his anus were dilated, congested, and smooth, suggesting that, as a passive male, he had engaged in anal sex shortly before his death. So far, this had been a very ordinary evening for William. But abruptly, this good mood would change. The post-mortem, conducted by Sir Bernard Spilsbury, confirmed that William had been subjected to a fast and ferocious attack by 1 or 2 men. The 6 lacerations to the back of his head matched the bloodied raffia of a broken bottle found at his feet, and 6 heavy blows from a fist to his eye, left hand, and mouth caused multiple skull fractures, unconsciousness, and he died of a brain hemorrhage. The telltale signs on the wallpaper of pear-shaped blood spatter in a downward trajectory confirm that William had been standing at the time of the attack. The smeared bedsheets indicate where he had fallen, and a 6-inch pool of blood around his swollen head was consistent with being unconscious for 12 to 14 hours until he was found. So at no point had he been moved. Possibly, out of panic, the killers made no attempt to conceal his body or the crime. They stole nothing of any value, not even the silver lighter, cigarette case, or watch. Instead, they took £2, a foreign suit, a pair of black shoes, and 2 sets of white underpants. So for Detective Inspector Smale, it was clear that this robbery wasn't an act of greed. This was need. When questioned, none of the witnesses could recall the names of the 2 Canadian soldiers that William had been seen with that night. But they all agreed that the men were dishevelled, penniless, rough-looking, and having nowhere to sleep that night, William had invited them to stay at his flat. On William's bedroom floor lay a crumpled Canadian Army issue forage cap, a pair of filthy black socks, 2 sweat-stained khaki shirts with the label of Warrendale, a uniform manufacturer for the Canadian Army, a very worn pair of Army issue boots in size 7 with the soles worn down to the leather, and 3 pairs of underpants, one made by Horseman and Raven, a gentleman's outfitter on Regent Street, and the other 2 pairs of underpants were Army issued and very dirty, smelly, and heavily soiled. Desperate to flee the murder scene, out of panic, they tried to unlock the flat's front door using the 3 keys they found, rather than the actual key which William had popped on a hook in a cupboard. So unable to lock the inner door, they fled by the bathroom window and out onto the fire escape. Because of the overwhelming evidence, Detective Inspector Smale requested the fingerprints and details of all Canadian soldiers serving in Britain who had been reported missing since the time of the murder, or who were being held under detention for being absent without leave. Admittedly, this was like searching for a needle in a haystack, as the list of possible suspects was huge, the war was raging on, the Canadian Army was not compliant, and the interviews would take almost a year. But was the detective right? Was the evidence as simple as it seemed? Was the unplanned murder of William Raven really just a spontaneous attack and an opportunist robbery? Or had this humble copper got it all wrong, having been duped by a cunning criminal in a masterclass of deception and misdirection? On the 17th of July 1943, after 9 long months of interviews, Detective Inspector Smale went to Aira Camp in Headley Down, Hampshire, to question a 21-year-old Canadian private called Henry Smith. With the murder having plagued on his guilty conscience, Henry confessed and named his pal, 21-year-old George Frederick Brinicum, as the murderer. The evidence supported his story. Their fingerprints were an exact match, and being rough-looking young men who wore uniforms and came from difficult backgrounds, although neither, for good reason, admitted that they were gay, they were just the type that William liked. Having enlisted into the army to escape the horrors of their family life, Henry and George absconded from their units at the end of September 1942. But with no plans and very little money, soon they were hungry, broke, homeless, and their uniforms and boots were worn out, tatty and soiled. In return for companionship and anonymous sex, William Raven offered them food, drink, and a bed. On the 14th of September 1943, at the Old Bailey, Henry Smith and George Brinicombe were charged with murder. But with no evidence of premeditation, Henry was acquitted and sent back to Canada, and George was found guilty of manslaughter and served just 3 years in Wormwood Scrubs prison. So you see, sometimes the simplest answer is usually the right one. And although this story has all the hallmarks of a classic locked room mystery, it was really just a very simple tale of two young lads on the run in need of a few basic things: money, food, a place to sleep, and a clean pair of pants. On the surface, William Raven's death may have looked like a case for the great detective himself. And yet, even Sherlock Holmes himself would agree that its solution was elementary.
Good night. Good night. Good night, Mr. Good night. Oh, Watson, the needle.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Murder Mile. For me, that's the hard bit done. All the research, all the writing, with just 3 days of editing to go. Ugh. And now it's time for the pointless bit, which takes 0 effort. In fact, I could probably do it in my sleep. I could, if Eva didn't insist that I am on hand all night to mix her cocktails. That woman, eh? Before that, a big thank you to my new Patreon supporters, who are Rhiannon Williams, Christina Hughes, and Julie Davis. I thank you all for your support. It's very much appreciated. With also a big welcome to all new listeners of the Murder Mile podcast, and a special thank you to all the hardcore listeners who've been listening to the podcast since the dawn of time. Murder Mile was researched, written and performed by myself, with the main musical themes written and performed by Eric Stein and John Books of Cult with No Name. Thank you for listening, and sleep well. Did that quite well, I did that quite quick. Oh, yay! Oh, that edit wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be quite a difficult one because it was a bugger to write, but it was. I didn't make too many mistakes on that, which was good. I think what I'm trying to learn to do now is when you go back to the old episodes, it's a lot more flowery, the dialogue, and it used to take hours to record, especially when it was really difficult with my old laptop where the battery's only 3 hours and like the record would take longer than that. I'd have to stop halfway through. But new laptop, which lasts like on an edit, I can do 10 hours editing straight on it, which is great. But I'm learning to get a bit faster, and actually by doing a podcast every week, it's really helped my dyslexia. So I'm flying through stuff now, and I'm doing a quick read the night before, and then I'm practicing, and I'm taking my time, and it's all working. So that was a quicker record than I'd normally expect. What you hear is the edited bit. I edit that. I go through. Oh, sorry, welcome to Extra Mile. We'll get to that in a bit. All the narration you hear is me. I've gone through it. It's normally like about 2 hours long. I cut it down to about half an hour. And then I go through each word and I shape it. And I add kind of like, you won't notice this, but I add like microseconds. Like sometimes the phrasing is wrong. Like if you say, they went into William's room and he'd been found murdered. That's fine. But if sometimes when I listen to it, you go, oh, that's not good. So you go, they went into William's room, add some space, and he was found dead. Much better, works much better. And also when you add sound effects in, it's a weird sciencey thing, but when you add sound effects and music into an edit, it makes the spacing between the words shorter. It's not physically shorter, but according to your ear it is, because your ear, it hears silence longer, but it hears sounds shorter. So it's a weird thing. So if I had like a nice big gap, I put some music behind it, the gap gets shorter. So I have to re-stretch everything in there and rebalance everything, and take stuff out. And so anyway, that was boring. Right, welcome to Extra Mile. We're here. Hey, Extra Mile. We've got lots to get through today. So I'm going to open some windows because it's a weekend where it's going to be a bit hot. It's weird. It's meant to be kicking into like the 20 or early 30s degrees and stuff like that, but it hasn't gone hot yet, which is weird. There's a big cloud over, so I don't know whether it's just going to be muggy. I think it's going to be muggy and horrible. Anyway, I'm going to make tea time, pop the water in, there we go, pop that in there. All good, water on, tea bag in, cake at the ready, sugar, one sugar because I don't want to get too fat. By too fat I mean fat. There we go, coming back. Right, let's whiz through things. Oh, luckily I'm not too far from a Lidl now. I've moved on. Where I am, it's got no birds. It's weird. There's no coots, there's no swans, there's no ducks, there's no nothing. I've got my bread ready, they're not here. But it's good in a way because that means there's no interruptions. I'm away from the little airport. I'm away from the shit plant. So there's no smell. Nicely, there's no flies as well. So everything's kind of all right here. I'm near a kind of a motorway. So there's a motorway in the distance, but I don't think you can hear that. So and it's quite quiet here, which is really good. So yeah, I'm currently hiding under a tree because there's meant to be a heat wave this weekend. The temperature is going to go up to about 32, which when you're in a steel boat, the temperature can go up to like, my internal thermometer's like, it can go up to 42. I've seen it go up to 48 once, and you're sitting there and you're sweating away, and there's nothing you can do about it. You have all the windows and doors open, and he's still dying. But a little burpee there. A little bit of windy pops. So yeah, even on like a not too hot day, if you touch the steel on the outside, it can really hurt your hands because it picks up the heat. So I've been keeping busy doing Murder Mile, ploughing through. We got all the episodes to get us through to the end of the year, and then I can take a little break, and I've booked in my boat out for the week so I can do all my repairs and things like that. So I'm looking forward to that, and then hopefully the archive will still be open and I can get back to the archive and do some more research. I've been planning. There's some good episodes for next year as well. Done a little bit of gardening on the roof, which was good. I've planted some lavender, which has gone nice, and some wild flowers, and I might get rid of my herbs because I don't really eat the herbs, because they're all covered with aphids, but I like looking at them and smelling them. What else am I doing? In preparation for this, I was watching a lot of the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, Sherlock Holmes films from the 1930s, which are really good. A lot of them are copyright free, so you can watch them on YouTube. So I watched Hound of Baskervilles, Curse of the Pearl, Voice of Terror. They were a little bit old and clunky. What was I watching last night? The Scarlet Claw. The Scarlet Claw is interesting. If you watch that one and you like the new, well, they're not the new, but the Benedict Cumberbatch ones, you can see the kind of pieces that they've taken from the Sherlock Holmes novels, but also from there as well. Like there's the Scarlet Claw. There's lots of little pieces that you can see that they've popped back in to that series. So they've been really good. I've been enjoying them. They're a bit old and clunky, but I kind of grew up with them because I'd spend summers at my grand's, and my gran liked things that, she got me into Harold Lloyd and Laurel and Hardy and Columbo and stuff like that. So, and also the old Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmeses. So if you want a bit of fun, go and check those out. They're very good. I like them. Don't expect like great plots, and don't expect like, or wizardry with the cameras and all that. It's very static, and because it's 1930s. But you know what? They're good fun. They really are good fun. Tea's almost done. So tea's almost done, and then we're going to get on with the questions. Then we're going to get into the extra mile stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that I had deliberately had to miss out. So, right, water in, let it stew. Oh, those chalky croissants look really good. Right, here's the questions. Don't forget, some may be deleted because I might take them out of the episode. Some might. Let's just do it. Right, question number 1. Which famous London landmark was William's shop on Regent Street nearest to? Which famous London landmark was William's shop on Regent Street nearest to? It's a place we've been to many times on Murder Mile. Question number 2. What was the name of William's shop manager? What was the name of William's shop manager? Interesting name, that one. Question 3. What 3 bottles were found in William's sitting room? Question 4. How much money did William take from the shop till? So that was the day of the murder, because he'd been broken into. How much money did he take from the shop till? Question 5. What was the official cause of William's death? Question 6. What shape were the blood spatter on his bedroom wall? What shape? Obviously the blood shape tells you exactly where he was standing. Little clue there. Question 7. What was William's wartime duties? Obviously, everyone during wartime were given duties, and given because of his age and his size and because he was a pacifist. And do you know what? I think more importantly, because of his skills, he was given this job. But what was that job? That was question 7. So this is question 8. Which science fiction author lived a few doors down from William? Obviously, this science fiction author didn't live there when William lived there, but his flat was there, mentioned at the start of the show. That was question 8. Question 9. What 3 items did William always have on him, but his killers didn't steal? So it's 3 items he always had on him. And question 10. Name William's 3 favourite pubs. I almost gave away the answer then. Right, let me try and do this next bit and make sure I try not to give away too much. Right, okay. So, when I was sitting down to write this, I was trying to... I deliberately, because there's a little bit of a connection in this story to the do you remember we did a burglary one a little while ago where you had the 3 guys... I think it's Geraghty was his name? Yeah, over in Bayswater, and the flat got broken into, and the first story was that they said that they went out and chucked out the wallet, and the second one was they went in and they beat him up to find out where his safe was, and then the third one looks more like a kind of a torture, a gay sex game gone wrong. Because there's a bit of similarity between this one and that one, I decided to write this one very differently. Because of where Sherlock Holmes is, I used a bit of a Sherlock Holmes motif with that. But also, as I was writing it, I was like, well, the interesting thing really about the story is kind of what does the evidence tell you, and is it really a confusing thing, or is it something really simple? And the more I started going through it, the more I realised I don't actually need Henry and George anymore, the killers. I don't really know. Originally they were going to be like halfway through we learn about them and then we get the case, but actually the more I started writing it, the more I was like, no, let's just stick with the evidence and what we see and what we think we see, and what looks important and what isn't important. And actually sometimes when you look at things, as you said at the end, the simplest story is most logical. So as I mentioned in there was an earlier burglary, literally 4 days before, at William's flat. Now, the police did look into this. It was 4 days before. There was Sunday, the 11th of October. The flat had been entered by thieves. Every article of clothing had been stolen. The police did look at it. There wasn't any fingerprints at the time. So there's a real coincidence with that between the the burglary murder, of which some of William's clothes were taken. To be honest, most of his clothes were taken because the burglars had already taken clothes before. But why would they come back and nick more clothes if they didn't know that he hadn't got any left? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, the police did look into it. There's not really a lot they can do. They couldn't find any fingerprints. But if you think about this case, it looks less like a burglary. This first one, if you think about it. Think about this final one that we've just done. These were two young, kind of dishevelled men, waifs and strays, the kind of thing that William liked, came round to his flat. Obviously, a bit of a to-do happened. William ended up dead. And they stole some of his clothes because they needed fresh clothes and they needed a bit of money. But if you think about it, maybe with this earlier one, maybe he brought back another waif and stray. Maybe that waif and stray, who knows, tied him up or stole his key or some, because there was no sign of a break-in, came back into the flat, then stole all of his clothes. So the reason why it was probably never solved by the police is probably William couldn't give them all the information. He probably couldn't say to them, do you know what, I picked up a young gay man, I'm a gay man, we were coming back for gay sex, he beat me up or tied me up and nicked my key. So it's unlikely he could give the full information to the police. As I said, you know, there seemed to be no sign of a break-in, which suggests that the burglar used a key. So that's in there. I've put that in there. That's one of those little red herrings that I've thrown in there, but you know, it doesn't really amount to much. So let's look at the killers themselves. I was going to give you a whole 10-minute bit about them, but in the end I thought, do you know what, we've kind of summed it up. They are exactly the type that William liked. They're kind of, you know, not exactly tall, slim but well built, wearing Canadian uniforms, young, you know, half his age, coming from difficult backgrounds. So let's kind of dig into it a little bit more. They were both 5'7", which is about William's height, slim but well built. You got George Frederick Brinicum, a private in the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps for the 47th General Field Transport Company. He was 21 years old, born in Montreal, Canada. On the 15th of January 1922, he was described as undisciplined, dishonest. His father and mother at the time still lived in Montreal. He was the second oldest of 10, 3 girls and 7 boys. It was said to be not a happy family life. Parents were always arguing. Children were undisciplined. Father had served in World War One in the 42nd Battalion Royal Highlanders of Canada. He was wounded in 1918 in France, and he lost his right foot, and since then has been living on disability pension. So obviously family life is difficult because they can't really earn much money. He's on 40% income, his father, and the rest is supported by the church. George attended school, passed with honours, so he's quite clearly, you know, he's got good bit of intelligence on him. Went to Montreal High School. He did 1 year, and then he got a job as a golf caddy. He kind of floundered around for a bit, wasn't really too sure what to do. Then obviously war started, as many young men. So he enlisted really just to escape his family. He arrived in the UK on the 8th of February 1940, described as not a good soldier. And from that point onwards, he got worse. If you think about it, he's undisciplined. None of them have criminal records. None of them have violent pasts. None of them are bad lads. They just don't like where they are, and they don't like their life. And it's just like they just don't want to be there, and they could just feel kind of stuck. I'm not trying to give them excuses, but you know, they're not. You know, they're not master criminals. They are just lads, really. The other one, Henry Smith, known as Smithy. He was 20. His parents married in England. His mother had a son to a previous marriage. His father, Thomas Smith, had 3 other sons by a previous marriage, one of whom was Henry. So a bit of a fragmented family there. He moved to Canada in 1928. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters since then, so same as the other one. Multiple, large family. He probably feels a bit left out. He served on a farm near Prince Albert over in Canada. His parents were also farmers. He did not get on well with his father or the rest of his family. Family had a reputation for being ungovernable. They were quite isolated. They kept to themselves. They weren't liked by their neighbours. Said that the mother kept a bad house. that means kind of untidy. Father was a heavy drinker. Children all had bad upbringings. Henry attended Higstrom School. He quit at age 15 and became a farm labourer, worked in a sawmill, joined the army in 1941. So he'd only been in the army for 1 year before the murder itself happened. He said he didn't really get a solid schooling. He could read a little, but he cannot write. He was described as of low intelligence, but neither of them were declared mentally defective and were both found fit to stand trial. His job in the army was to repair and service motor vehicles. In court, they said all of the parents were described as not being the type to set a good example to their children. But when you look at these boys, Henry and George, none of them are violent sorts. They're not drunks. They come from bad backgrounds. They're just really in search of love, attention. They're unsure of who they are. They don't like authority. But there's no criminal background there at all. Both enlisted, as mentioned, really just to escape their families, and I guess as a lot of young men did. None of them. We'll get into this very shortly. Are either of them gay? It's unsure. Don't forget, being gay was illegal. Both, especially in the United Kingdom, it was illegal up until 60s, wasn't it? I can't remember the date off the top of my head. So it's unsure whether they were both gay, or whether one of them was gay, or whether they were both secretly gay but hadn't told each other. Or there's a lot of that going on. Obviously, being in the forces, they're having to be a little bit cautious here. If they were gay men, obviously they couldn't say we were gay men, we were in a gay pub, we met with a gay man, we went back to a gay man's house to have some gay sex. Obviously they can't say that, because not only would they be kicked out of the army, which is probably what they want, but they would be arrested for being gay, because it's an illegal and if you admit that you're having gay sex, people, it wasn't too long prior to that people were still being executed in this country for having gay sex. So you can understand how cautious they are about being this. Let's see. Okay. The day of the murder. Don't forget. I think I've got more information on this shortly. Hang on. Let me whiz on a bit. Hang on. I'm trying to think. I've got details about... here they are. Okay. So, end of September, they decided to go on AWOL, absent without leave, which basically meant you could get a pass to get in and out of your barracks and to go on leave, but you were normally given like a chitty that says, you can go on leave for like 2 days, but then you need to be back here in 24 hours. If you look at the Richard Rhodes Henley episode, the guy, the pornographic Canadian sailor, he had like a leave for, I think it was 2 days, and he had to be back in Southampton at the end of that second day to get back on his ship. Otherwise he would be absent without leave. These guys were the same. So it was end of September, I think it was 29th of September. They went absent without leave. They hadn't really planned anything. They got a kit bag with them, but they hadn't really got much in it. They got the uniform that they were wearing. Obviously, they wore the uniform because it's the only really clothes that they've got, and B, it's kind of, if you're stopped by a policeman and you're wearing a uniform, that's fine. You just say we're on leave. That's fine. But if you're in civvies and you're of service age, obviously the policeman can say, why aren't you serving? What's going on? So they'd been away for about 2 weeks. They hadn't got it's slightly longer than 2 weeks. It's almost 3 weeks they'd been away. Obviously they got nowhere to live, they got nowhere to wash, they hadn't got any clean changes of clothes, especially no underpants. Their army boots were pretty much worn out. They'd stayed with a couple of friends a couple of days. They'd managed to scrape together some money and stayed a couple of nights at the YMCA in Croydon, which is way down in South London. Oh, me tea! I left me tea to stew. Cripes. Don't want to do that. Imagine missing out on me tea. Oh, got shortbread as well. Oh, life is good. Yeah, so YMCA in Croydon, down in South London. Yeah, and then on the 15th, so that's the day of, they went to Soho. They went into the York Minster on Dean Street. Oh, frick. Pretend you didn't hear that. They met William Raven. Obviously, that pub is a known homosexual pub. That's why William was there. If you look at all the reports by everyone at the time, especially by the police, they always say it's frequented by perverts and sodomites. Do you know? Basically, any pub that contains homosexuals is always described as perverts and sodomites. So anyone who's in there who gives a witness statement, it's unlikely that they would be believed. It was that era. So, but at that point they had no premeditation of robbery or murder, which is why Henry was found not guilty of murder or robbery, and George was found guilty. They say manslaughter, but really, if you look at the amount of time he served, it was pretty much just an assault, which led to murder, which is why it was a manslaughter charge. But at that point, there had no plans to rob anyone. Literally, they met with William. William was nice. He bought them some drinks. They'd actually offered to buy him some drinks back. They hadn't got a lot of money on them. He saw that and he was like, no, look, this is my treat. I'm going to buy you some drinks. I'm going to buy you some meals. And they were like, we don't have anywhere to stay. And he was like, that's fine. Come back to mine. You can stay at mine. Not a problem at all. It's clear that... Well, it's not clear whether they knew that William was gay or not. Everyone else says that William was definitely gay. Even on the police records, like Stanley James Darcy, who was one of the witnesses there. The police records state Stanley James Darcy, who is definitely a homosexual. It's that era when the police like have to state this. Where were they? So, invited back to his flat. We'll get into the details of what happened in the flat very shortly. They went to a few pubs. They had some food. George, who was the kind of plump guy wearing the makeup, he left. So it was just the three of them, and they went back to the flat. So Charles Boglin and his wife, good name, at flat 27, one floor below, saw William and the two Canadian soldiers enter the flat at between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. He said they were scruffy and untidy. Obviously no one could remember their names at all. They went into the flat, as mentioned. William let them in, told them to sit down. He locked the inner door, put the key in his... It was like a hidden little cupboard behind a curtain, which is why they couldn't find it. So when they looked for the key to try and get out, what they did was they picked up... I think it was either the key to the outer door, which they couldn't get to because the inner door was locked, or it was the keys to his shop, so which is why they couldn't get out. They opened a bottle of old... Oh, I almost did that. I almost gave these bloody questions. They sat drinking for an hour. George was on the Chesterfield with William, that's the settee. Henry was on the armchair. Bill suggested that Henry sleep on the divan in the lounge, which was there's kind of a little bed in the sitting room, and that George share a bed with William. This was agreed. They said that William appeared to be decent and hospitable. It seems odd at that point. Well, it's not really odd if you think about it in the right way. It seems odd that George and Henry didn't suggest that, given the fact that there was two beds, there was one in William's room and one in the lounge, or there was also a sofa, that all three couldn't have had their own beds if it was just boys just needing a place to stay. Or, given the fact that George and Henry were buddies, that they could have shared the bed in the sitting room if they were just buddies. But the fact that at this point it's kind of offered that Henry will sleep on the sofa in the sitting room, and George and William will go into William's bedroom and he'll share a bed with this stranger who he's just met. As mentioned in the story, the detectives mentioned that someone had briefly used the bed, possibly slept in the bed, on the spare sofa, but by the way it looked like he hadn't slept in there for quite a long time. The sheets were slightly unmade. So then they all went into William's bedroom. So this is where things get really weird. I was going to put this in the story, but I didn't want to make the story overlong, and it's as mentioned, I wanted to focus on what the evidence tells you as opposed to what people say. So Henry's story. Henry says after a short time, William came back into the lounge. He asked Henry to join them in the bedroom. So that's to join Henry, to join George and William in his bedroom. George came out of the bathroom Obviously, don't forget there's the bottle of white wine which is unopened in the bedroom, which was never opened. George and Henry were wearing only their underpants, and they all sat on the bed drinking. William was only dressed in his pyjama top and started to play with their private parts. He put out the light and asked them both to. If you're easily shocked by sexual things, it's probably best if you switch off now. If not, this is nothing big. It's nothing crude. But if you don't like sexual things, then this next bit may not be for you. He started to play with their private parts. William put out the light and asked them both to put their cocks in his mouth at the same time. They refused, and according to Henry, who put the light on, William was lying in the centre of the bed. George was lying on the other side. William turned out the lights off again and asks for a blowjob. Henry then, in the darkness, hears an argument, a thud, the lights on, saw William lying on the floor covered in blood, groaning. He asked George, "What did you do that for?" George said, "Well, the bastard was asking for it. Let's get out of here." That's Henry's version. George's version, obviously he was sharing the bed with William. He woke up to find William had George's cock in his hand. William put the lights out a bit. Put the lights out again. The bedclothes were thrown back. George said, "What the hell are you doing?" He got out of bed, noticed William was only wearing his pyjama bottoms. William kept trying to fondle George's private parts. Henry entered the bedroom. William started fondling both of them, wanted both of their cocks in his mouth. George, in a bad temper, called William a dirty bastard. William was half sitting on the bed. George hit William with a bottle. That makes sense because obviously, as the evidence says, that there were fragments of bloodied raffia on the floor, although George wasn't sitting on the bed at the time. He was actually standing up, and hit him several times, punched him. William slumped off the bed onto the floor. Oh, I got hiccups. George said Henry was also wild and was punching Bill several times. Don't forget, Sir Bernard Spilsbury said that the attack could have happened from either one or two men. It was hard to determine. They realised what they had done and decided to change into plain clothes. They both left their old stinky underwear behind. George put his battle dress, his khaki uniform, into a brown case and took it, but Henry's was left behind. No, Henry was wearing his. He carved it. No. Sorry, George's was left on the floor. Sorry. This is all these details. There's so many different details from different people. It's hard to work out who's telling the truth and who remembers things clearly. What else we got? At about roughly 1 a.m, Charles Boglin, again, who was one floor below, said he heard a noise on the fire escape. Sounded like someone going past his window, and he heard a thud, which seemed to be a bottle. What else we got? As mentioned, they nicked their clean pair of pants because they needed a clean pair of pants, but they'd taken their pants off and left them on the floor. It wasn't a message, it was just they'd forgotten about it. You're in a panic, you just murdered someone, your blood's pumping, your brain's thumping, you don't know what's going on. So That's why they left all their shite behind. He left his army boots, he left his uniform. He just wasn't thinking. It's fight or flight. You just want to flee. What else did they nick? Obviously, almost gave away a question then. These bloody questions. What else we got? Yep, they left the flat. It's weird that the dates are all wrong on this. This is the problem with this case, is everyone's memory of the dates is all wrong. Like the porter says he enters the flat at about 1ish, but then the police constable doesn't arrive until 2:30, and then the detective doesn't arrive until about 4. Everything's all skew-if. With fleeing the flat, they say that they left the flat, it was roughly around dawn. So I've looked at the dates, and dawn at that point would have been at 6:50 a.m, which doesn't make sense, because they'd left at about they'd left at about 1:30. But if they left at like 10 to 7 in the morning, that means they spent about 5 to 6 hours with the body, which doesn't make sense. What did they do in a flat? They didn't do anything, because they didn't touch anything. They went to the underground from Baker Street to Victoria and then to Croydon, which would make sense if they did leave at that time. But if they left at 1:30, then they couldn't have got the tube, because the tube wouldn't have been running. But they could have got a bus. They went from Victoria to Croydon. They stayed at the Railway Bell Public House, where they spent one night, which is where they spent the money that they nicked from his wallet. They got rid of William's clothing they had stolen, and then spent 2 nights sleeping under the railway arches, then decided to surrender and headed back to their unit. So on the 19th of October 1942, so just 4 days later, Henry reported back to column headquarters at Forest Row in Sussex, and reported to Sergeant Major John Ryder, who knew that they were absentee, and he was arrested for being absent and placed in the guard room. They were still wearing battle dress and were dishevelled. On the 20th of October, they were charged with 28 days of field punishment. Obviously, the army doesn't know that they've committed a robbery and a murder. 21st, article in the Police Gazette, a wanted poster, a description of William Raven, the attack, and his attackers. Obviously, they didn't know his name. Obviously, very, very kindly in the Police Gazette article, it says William is described. William is a known associate of sodomites. Great, that's very, very sympathetic. As mentioned, Sir Bernard Spilsbury did the post-mortem. There was a coroner's inquest at Hammersmith Coroner's Court on the 6th of April 1943. That was quite a couple of months later, but it took a long time to get all the pieces of information in there. They knew exactly what had gone wrong, what had happened that night. It was just, they needed to work out who these people were, and by that point they got their list of who they needed to interview, and they were working their way through it. The verdict was that William was murdered by persons or persons unknown. Sir Bernard Spilsbury gave evidence and explained how the person died, which is one of the questions, which I won't give away. What else have we got? Obviously, this has been playing on all of their minds for quite a while. On the 17th of July at 11:30 a.m, Detective Inspector Smale went to Headley Down in Hampshire and interviewed Henry to account for his movements on the 15th and 16th. He said he was in London with his friends, George Brinicombe. They'd gone AWOL. They basically explained that they went to such and such pub, met up with Bill, who was William Raven, went back to his flat, and Henry said, "It's been worrying me ever since. I would like to tell you what happened," and he made a full statement. Because of this, on the same day, they went to Board Hill Camps in Haywards Heath to interview George. To account for those 2 days, George says, "Has Smithy made a statement? If he has, I will do the same. I will help you. We met 2 men, and obviously this is William and the other guy with the painted face, and went with one called Bill to his flat in Baker Street. "He was the filthiest man I have ever met. I will tell you the truth." And they made a statement. They were taken to Cannon Street Police Station and placed on remand at Marlborough Police Court, which is just off Carnaby Street, on the 26th of July 1943 until the 10th of August, where they were charged with murder. As mentioned, trial began 14th of September 1943, both charged with murder. But as there was no evidence that both men had gone there for the purposes of robbery, obviously don't forget, if you murder someone whilst you're committing a robbery, that's a death sentence instantly. If you murder someone, that's a life sentence. But in this case, there was no evidence of robbery and premeditation for robbery, no evidence of premeditation for murder. Looked like a kind of a sex game that had gone wrong, or kind of, a common assault which had led to a death. So therefore, Henry was acquitted, and George was given 3 years at Wormwood Scrubs. And that was that. I got some interesting photos online. If you're Patreon subscribers, there's no crime scene photos with this one, which is slightly annoying. But we've got some good diagrams of what the flat looked like and the shapes, and you can see how they escaped, and you can see where all the neighbours are positioned. And I've got a video that of the outside of the building, looks exactly as it did, and some photos, and a photo of William Raven, which I'll probably use on the front of the podcast as well. And yeah, some other interesting stuff as well. So let's do the questions. Yeah, that was a long ramble. Let's do some questions. Right. Question number 1. Which landmark was William's shop nearest? Which London landmark was William's shop nearest to on Regent Street? The answer was Piccadilly Circus, where the Blackout Ripper picked up many of his victims. Question number 2. What was the name of William's shop manager? His name was Wallace Staggle. Good name. Question number 3. What 3 bottles were found in William's sitting room? They were whiskey, rum, and cordial. I almost accidentally gave away that it was an Old Nick rum. It's likely that the Old Nick rum was the bottle that was used to smash him over the head, because that had a raffia coating on it as well. Question number 4. How much money did William take from the shop till? He took £20 in £1 notes, which is roughly £600 today. But by the end of the night, he only had about £2 left, which is about 60 quid. 30, 60, yeah. Receipts were found. He'd been out drinking that night and had some fun with his new pals, but he'd ordered a lot of clothes. He'd ordered some new clothes from Austin Reed, so yeah, he'd got things on order, hence he'd spent a lot of money. Question 5. What was William's cause? Oh dear. What was William's cause of death? According to Sir Bernard Spilsbury, it was brain hemorrhage caused by skull fractures. Nasty, thinking that he'd been lying on the floor 12 to 14 hours. Yuck. Question 6. What shape were the blood spatter on William's wall? They were pear-shaped, in a downward trajectory, showing that he'd been hit over the head while standing, and the blood had kind of hit an angle downwards, hence they'd become pear-shaped. Question 7. What was William's wartime duties? William was the manager of the Merchant Navy Supply Association. Question 8. Which science fiction author lived a few doors down from William? Obviously not when he was there. That was H.G. Wells. Oddly, there's no statues there for H.G. Wells. There's one in, is it Slough? Which is where a War of the Worlds is kind of based. Not in America. I know everyone thinks it's based in America because of the Orson Welles version, but it's not. It starts off in Slough, and then it kind of populates from there. Question 9. What 3 items did William always have on him, but his killers did not steal? And that was a silver cigarette lighter, a silver cigarette case, and a silver wristwatch. And question number 10. Name William's 3 favourite pubs. I gave away one of them slightly earlier on. They were the York Minster on Dean Street, the Swiss Tavern on Old Compton Street, and the Volunteer on Baker Street. For those who know Soho, I mean, we've mentioned some of these pubs before. You've got the Swiss Tavern on Old Compton Street is now known as Compton's. The York Minster on Dean Street is known as the French House. And the Volunteer is still exactly as it was. It's still called the Volunteer. It's still on Baker Street. The Volunteer, you'll remember from earlier episodes, that was one of the other favourite pubs of the Blackout Ripper. So, given the fact that William lived there and went to that pub quite a lot, there's a likelihood that he may have been in the pub at the same time as the Blackout Ripper. Interesting. Or they may have met. They may not have. Blackout Ripper's billets, don't forget, were only about a 5-minute walk just up the road. So, because he was based out of Regent's Park, and William's flat actually does. It looks over Regent's Park. It hasn't got a nice view because there's a building in the way, but it's got a view. Right, that was that. That's the episode. Hope you enjoyed that. Something different, I thought. I always try and give you something different, even if it's a similar style murder. I try not to do, because there's a format to these where I tell you the street, then we tell the victim's early life, and then we go into what happened just before the murder, then we tell the murder, then we do the investigation, then we do the arrest, and then we go to trial. But with this one, I thought, let's do something entirely different. So, yeah. Hope you enjoyed that. It's something different, and also it's to show, I think too often that people, if you listen to too much true crime podcasts, like I know sometimes if I post things and I go, "Oh, what do you think happened in this case?" and someone goes, "Oh, I think it was an assassin. Oh, I think he was involved in some kind of gangland killing." And it's like, I think you've been listening to too much true crime. I think you need to start sitting down and going, okay, what's logical? Because normally the logical, simple answer is the right answer. Things aren't complicated and exciting, and I know sometimes people want it to be, but it isn't. It's just, this is a simple murder. Just 2 guys didn't plan to murder anyone, didn't plan to commit a robbery, turned up there. Something happened during a sexual experience. Whether this is one of the theories that I was working on, is whether William and George went into the bedroom and Henry didn't know that they were gay, because Henry seems to be a little bit naive, and maybe he heard a noise, went into the bedroom, saw Henry and George having sex, because don't forget, William and George having sex, because don't forget, according to the autopsy, William had just had anal sex and he was a passive agent. Maybe he didn't know that George was gay as well, saw it, George got angry, said, "Oh, he was trying to have sex with me or something," and then attacked William to defend himself and in his own good honour. Who knows? Or, it's hard to work out really what went on. So this, this is like most murders. You don't plan for a murder to happen. It just kind of happens. Your emotions get heightened. Something triggers it off. Bang, someone ends up dead. You don't plan to steal from them, but, you're a bit broke. You look down, you see a wallet, you go, "I'll have that." You run out. You don't really think about it. So that's just what most murders are. They're simple, they're irrational, they're not planned. Although, if you listen to too many true crime podcasts, don't forget they're cherry-picked. I try and tell you all of the murders and try and make them interesting. If you listen to the shite that comes out by Wondery, they will just tell you the most interesting and fascinating ones, which have plot twists, and you can turn them into movies and you can make a lot of money. Whereas what I try to do, like with last week's episode, the beating of Baby Richard, there's no mystery there. It's 2 people who were uncaring, who didn't like the baby, woman in a bad situation, and then she handed it over to another woman, and the man hated the sound of the baby, so he beat it to death. No real mystery there. They didn't make lots of money off it. They didn't do it because it was a premeditated, and they wanted to be clever, and they were trying to get some kind of insurance scam off them, as you'd expect in something like that. It was just, people are irrational. They're at times stupid. They make mistakes. They're full of regret. And I think that's what I tried to tell you with Murder Mile is real stories about real people committing real murders. It's not pre-planned, it's not premeditated. So even Blackout Ripper, you look at the Blackout Ripper, not pre-planned, not premeditated. He doesn't even take weapons with him to these murders. It's all instinct. He sees a woman. Sometimes he likes her. Sometimes he doesn't like it. If he doesn't like it, he will kill her. But he doesn't have a weapon on her. He doesn't have a plan. He just goes with what his gut feeling is. What's in his guts. And that's what most murder is. It's irrational. It's illogical. It's human. And hopefully that's what comes across with this one. Just it looks complicated, but it's not. It's just a very simple murder. Anyway, that was a lot of waffle. Right, I'm going to switch off now. I'm going to switch off, have my tea, have some cakes. If you're out and about, have yourselves a good day. Stay safe. Be happy. Say hi to people. I've started doing that again. I've realised that, being isolated for so long because of the virus, I've stopped saying hello to people. So I've started saying hello to strangers or just giving them a wave, Joe. It makes everyone feel nice. Apart from that, stay safe, be good, be happy. Have a good week. Be good. Bye.